Story 1. The Ruins of Volkonsky Science Institute. The Skeleton Halls of St. Petersburg. Maxim and Dmitri were exactly the kind of students that teachers warn other students about. First-year students at Moscow State University, 19 years old, convinced of their own invincibility in the way that only 19-year-olds can be. They had been the loudest, most reckless members of their college study trip to St. Petersburg from the very first hour. Their seniors had pulled them aside more than once and told them quietly that their attitude was going to get them into serious trouble one day. They had nodded politely and immediately gone back to doing exactly what they wanted. On the second night of the trip, while their classmates slept, Maxim and Dmitri slipped out of their hotel into the white St. Petersburg night, the famous white nights of June, when the sun barely sets and the sky stays pale and luminous until 2 in the morning. Their hotel sat near the old Vasilyevsky Island district, and directly across the street from their building stood a large abandoned structure. 5 stories of crumbling imperial-era brick, its windows dark and empty, its facade covered in decades of grime and creeping vines. Iron gates stood at the entrance, rusted half open. At a small 24-hour tea kiosk near the hotel entrance, an old man sold them cups of strong black tea and noticed them staring at the building. "You want to know about that place?" he said. "Tell us," Maxim said immediately. The old man wrapped both hands around his own cup and looked at the building with an expression that contained no curiosity whatsoever, only the flat wariness of someone who has lived next to a dangerous thing for too long. He told them it was the old Volkonsky Institute of Natural Sciences, a pre-revolutionary research facility that had once been one of St. Petersburg's most prestigious institutions. In its later years before it closed, it had been used for medical research, cadaver dissection, anatomical studies, the bodies of unclaimed dead brought in from the city's hospitals and morgues. When the institute closed in the late Soviet era, he said, the bodies were never properly removed. Budget disputes, bureaucratic failures. The building was simply locked and forgotten. And the night after it closed, the strange things began. The old man's hands tightened around his cup as he spoke, as though the mere act of describing the place was something his body objected to. Maxim and Dmitri were electrified. They searched the building online on their phones while the old man watched them with resigned disapproval. They found forum posts, amateur paranormal investigation blogs, a local newspaper article from 2003, all pointing to the same conclusion. The Volkonsky Institute was considered one of the most haunted locations in St. Petersburg. Multiple warnings, multiple accounts, multiple people who had gone in and come out changed. They had already decided to go in before they finished reading. Midnight. The white night sky was still pale enough to see by. Maxim kept his phone camera running as they approached. Dmitri's idea, so they could show everyone the next morning that there was nothing to be afraid of. A swarm of bats burst from the upper windows as they reached the gate, sweeping past their faces in a black rush. Maxim stumbled backward. Dmitri laughed at him. Then from behind them, a sharp voice. "Who's there? Who's out there?" A security guard was running toward them from the far end of the street. Without thinking, both of them sprinted through the rusted gate and into the building. The ground floor was one enormous hall, dust and rubble, and the smell of something that had been dead and decomposing for a very long time. Cobwebs everywhere, thick as curtains. Whatever furniture had once been here was long gone. The floor crunched under their feet with decades of accumulated debris. A cracking sound from deeper in the building. The guard coming in after them. They ran for the stairs. The first floor was a series of large empty rooms. Classrooms once, their blackboards still on the walls. Chalk dust still visible in the white night light filtering through the broken windows. They moved through them quickly, half excited, half unnerved by the scale of the abandonment. Then the smell hit them, coming from a room at the end of the corridor, stronger than everything else, concentrated, wrong in a way that went beyond ordinary decay. They pushed the door open. The room had been a laboratory once. Long metal tables, rusted and overturned. Glass-fronted cabinets, their contents gone. Drain channels in the floor. a room built for the systematic examination of dead bodies. Maxim saw her first. In the corner at the window, a girl, standing with her back to them, one hand on the window frame, leaning forward as though looking at something below. "Hey!" Maxim crossed the room quickly. "Hey, don't—" He grabbed her arm. It felt like grabbing a piece of wood. The girl turned around. She was a skeleton, complete and intact and standing upright, turning toward him with the slow deliberateness of something that had been waiting in this room for a very long time. The empty eye sockets faced him. The jaw dropped slightly, as though it were trying to form words. And then it began to change, the bones shifting, something moving behind the eye sockets, a suggestion of form where there should have been nothing. Maxim lost consciousness. He fell against the window frame and slid to the floor and went through the window. Outside. 3 floors up. He hit the ground. Dmitri saw him fall. He ran. Back through the laboratory, back into the corridor, and stopped. The corridor was full of skeletons. Not scattered on the floor, not lying in heaps. Standing. Upright. Arranged in a loose semicircle facing him, the pale night light coming through the broken windows, illuminating their empty faces. They began to move toward him. Dmitri ran in the opposite direction, down the stairs, through the ground floor hall, out through the gate, and collapsed on the pavement in front of the building. Their classmates found them both unconscious beside the Volkonsky Institute at 6 in the morning. Multiple injuries. 3 days in a St. Petersburg hospital. When they were well enough to talk, 2 things came to light that nobody could explain. The first was that the old man at the tea kiosk did not exist. The kiosk had been there for 20 years, and the woman who ran it confirmed she had never employed or seen anyone matching their description. She worked alone. Always had. The second was that when the Volkonsky Institute had been locked and its last security guard assigned to watch the exterior, the guard had been found dead inside the building 3 days after his posting began. Burned, cause of fire undetermined. His body had never been removed. The burned face that had melted in front of Dmitri's eyes in the corridor, the face that had dissolved into bone and grinning skull, had been the guard's face. Neither Maxim nor Dmitri ever discussed that night publicly, but neither of them has ever entered an abandoned building since. Story 2. The Black Shadow of Mosfilm Studios. Something on the set. Sonia had been dreaming of this moment for 6 years. 26 years old, strikingly beautiful, with the kind of natural screen presence that casting directors notice immediately. She had come to Moscow from a small city in the Urals at 20, convinced that she was going to become a film actress, carrying nothing but one suitcase and the absolute certainty of the young. 6 years later, the certainty had worn thin. She had done commercials, small television roles, a supporting part in a regional drama that nobody had seen. She had been to hundreds of auditions and been told she was wonderful and not been called back. She had watched her savings diminish and her confidence follow. She was 3 weeks from giving up entirely when her phone rang. A casting director she had met briefly at a workshop 2 years ago. He told her that one of Russia's most respected film directors had seen her showreel and was interested in her for a significant role, a proper film, a proper budget. Shooting at Mosfilm Studios, the legendary Soviet-era facility on the outskirts of Moscow, the largest film studio complex in Europe, where hundreds of classic Russian films had been made. Sonia drove to the audition in a borrowed car with a broken heater in February and gave the best performance of her life. She got the role. She cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Then she drove home and called her mother. She arrived at Mosfilm on the first day of shooting with the particular electric excitement of someone whose life is finally beginning. The studio complex was extraordinary, vast and slightly surreal, like a small city dedicated entirely to illusion. Outdoor sets that could be dressed as any era, any location, enormous sound stages, the accumulated history of Russian cinema in every corridor. Sonia found her green room, met the crew, reviewed her lines, and settled in. Then the green room door began to rattle. The bathroom door, closed, locked from the inside according to the latch, was vibrating in its frame, a sound like someone knocking frantically from within. Sonia crossed the room and stood in front of it and listened. The knocking intensified. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. Empty. The bathroom was completely empty. She was still standing in the doorway when the mirror on her dressing table cracked. Not a gradual crack, an instantaneous fracture, the glass splitting from one corner to the other with a sound like a small gunshot. And on the cracked surface, in letters that had not been there a moment before, something was written in what appeared to be Old Church Slavonic script, in a dark reddish-brown color that Sonia did not want to think about too carefully. She screamed. She ran out of the green room. She told 3 crew members what she had seen. They went back with her. The mirror was intact. The bathroom was empty and quiet. No writing anywhere. Nobody believed her. The shoot was beginning. She had no choice but to return to her green room and let the makeup artist work on her face while she tried to slow her breathing. The first scene was exterior. Sonia walking through a market set, a pickpocket approaching, a brief confrontation. Technically simple. She performed it perfectly the first time. The director called for a retake, then another, then another. They were 20 takes into the same scene when he called her over to the monitor. He showed her the footage. He told her it wasn't her performance causing the problem. Every single take showed the same anomaly, a dark shape hovering near her head. He thought it was a lighting issue. He was going to have the gaffer look at the rig setup. Sonia looked at the monitor. In the dark shape near her head, she could see 2 red points of light. Eyes. She told the director. He looked at the monitor again. He saw the shadow. He did not see the eyes. He decided to move to interior scenes. The next setup was a simple domestic scene. Sonia sitting on a sofa, drinking tea, speaking to an off-screen character. One of the lighting technicians climbed the rigging above the set to adjust a spotlight 20 feet above the floor. He fell. The spotlight came with him. The broken glass drove into his abdomen when he hit the floor. As the ambulance was called and the set descended into chaos, the technician, pale, losing blood, barely conscious, kept repeating the same thing. Someone pushed me. From behind, someone pushed me. There was nobody near him on the rigging. The producer and director decided to shoot one final scene before halting for the day. A close sequence. Sonia at a desk writing in a diary. Simple coverage. Minimal setup. The director called action. Sonia began to write. She did not follow the script. The director called cut. She continued writing. He shouted cut again, walked onto the set, put his hand on her shoulder. She turned and screamed at him, not in Russian, not in any language anyone on set recognized. A guttural, layered sound that seemed to come from multiple places simultaneously, as though more than one voice were using her body at the same time. Her hair came loose and fell across her face. Her makeup had run in tracks down her cheeks. Her eyes, when they were visible through the hair, were wrong. The pupils too large. The expression behind them too old for her face. Everyone on set took several steps back. Then Sonia collapsed. She woke up in a hospital with a makeup artist sitting beside her. The makeup artist told her what had happened after she lost consciousness. That the director had played back the final footage for the authorities. That in the footage the black shadow was visible again near Sonia's head. Closer this time, much closer, essentially touching her. That in the final frames before the recording ended, the shadow had moved directly in front of the camera lens. And then, the recording stopped. The film never resumed production. Sonia's dream had collapsed. But the makeup artist, who had worked at Mosfilm for 15 years and had heard the stories, told her quietly as she was being discharged that she was lucky to be leaving with her life. Because Mosfilm Studios, she said, was built on old ground. The land beneath it had been a battlefield during an ancient war, centuries before the studios were built, before the city had expanded to reach it. Soldiers had died there in enormous numbers, Their remains had never been properly interred, never properly honored, and some of them, she said, had never stopped fighting.